Hi, everybody, and welcome to PrecogTime number 25, the last PrecogTime of 2020. We will see you back here in 2021, and we hope everybody has a good new year. But for our 25th episode, we're really happy, lucky, and excited to talk to our dear friend and brilliant artist, Heidi Howard, who's also a frequent collaborator of Precog magazine from a collaboration she did with her partner Esteban Cabeza de Vaca in issue 3 to her and her mom and collaborators wholehearted engagement with issue 5, both in print and in the digital version of Bubble Orchestra. Heidi's an amazing artist who shows locally and internationally, who's just coming back from a teaching fellowship at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, also with Esto. She's a fabulous painter and also a really engaged artist citizen, and we're really excited to talk to her tonight. So as you all know too, if you have questions along the way, throw them in the chat, and if they're procedural, we'll ask them sort of on as they come up, and if not, we'll save them for the end for the last 10 or 15 minutes of the conversation. So we wanted to start this the way we start all of these, which is, Heidi, how's your quarantine? How's your plague year been?
It's been interesting, like everybody else's, I guess. I think I've always been really worried about the environment and kind of capitalism and how we're living. So I think the pandemic emphasized some of those issues and brought them to other people's attention. So I feel good about that, possibly.
Yeah. Cool. And what has it been like for you to make work in the pandemic?
Well, I was at the Rauschenberg residency when the pandemic broke out. So I was making tons of work there and really enjoying my time and walking on the beach every day, and enjoying the warm weather. And then it was very strange to come back to New York where it was very cold, and both of my parents got the coronavirus by the time I was back. And my mom's best friend's husband passed away from it. So I don't know, it was really scary to see what happened in New York, and how badly the government was unable to coordinate an effort to help people. And so for the first few months, I think I was just making marker drawings of butterflies. And then I started painting portraits of people on Zoom. And that was really nice because I think one of the things about kind of like talking on video chat or talking on the phone is there's not that much room for silence. Like when you hang out in person, things just happen out of the silence. And so making the paintings, and also like we would just have most of our conversations about surfaces and surviving when the pandemic first started. So the painting space, even if it was on Zoom, became an open space in that way. But I'm still thinking about really like the format of Zoom and then the format of my paintings, and if I want to engage with that more and how it'll change things.
So you make portraits, and I guess there's room sort of to start, not at the beginning, but you make portraits of other people. And I guess as we start to look through your images, we're interested in hearing from you about why you're interested in portraiture. And the way that you organize your images always includes images of the person that you're painting, as well as the portrait themselves. So so thinking about this choice as well and how you see portraiture relating to the lives of the people that you're depicting.
Well, I started kind of really painting seriously um, right when I was graduating high school. I was reading Edith Wharton's book, The House of Mirth, and thinking about women in rooms and women as decorative objects. The heroine in that book, Lily Bart, she's like a young woman, and it's kind of about how she's supposed to get married, and then she's seen in the wrong places at the wrong time, and then she can't get married anymore, and then like her whole value in society is gone. But I really love the way Edith Wharton writes about like the clothes and the rooms and these different places. And there's something that can be sort of like superficial or commodified about those things, but there's also something really interesting about the body and architecture. And Edith Wharton had a huge, really beautiful garden. So I'm interested in those kind of feminine domains or qualities, and um, like working with that imagery and material. And I envisioned making paintings that combined things like Impressionism and abstract expressionism, which were like types of paintings that I really loved, and also some pretty realistic painting like Vermeer. But I didn't really know how to paint at the time when I had this idea. So it takes, I feel like, at least 6 years to gain a facility with paint. And yeah, and like in that time, I became friends with a lot of artists, and I thought it was really interesting to integrate their practices, their different ways of using paint or other materials into my paintings. And I like the open aspect of my practice. Like I think there's something political about letting the sitter come into my studio and really trying to change the whole format of how I'm painting based on what they bring to me. But that can also, maintaining that flexibility can be pretty difficult.
One thing which is really notable about your painting practice, as I think both Flo and I have been painted by you, and we've sort of seen how you work in many ways, is that you really ask.
So did Kelly.
And Kelly, wait, was Kelly painted by Heidi too? Oh, right, recently. Yeah, in the Zoom. But you really, in the portraits, you really ask people to bring their interests to you. Like you ask for resources and research and things that people like and are influenced by. And I'm wondering why or how that connects to this idea of openness and the place that painting or portraiture might have in community.
Yeah, I think that making things more flexible in our communities for just like wild ideas that people have is something that I wish I saw everywhere, like especially teaching in Tennessee, where you see a lot of people wearing the same thing in this really strong football culture, and this kind of like performed masculinity that doesn't make any sense anymore. I want to embrace people's, like indulge people's whims and embrace these different ideas, because I think living in a community where everybody is respected, including the earth, is something that we can all do, and it doesn't involve like sacrifice. It should involve pleasure more than sacrifice. so I like Flo brought the most things that anybody's ever brought to my studio when I painted her, and it was really fantastic. She brought like cacti and carnations, and she was wearing this fantastic outfit that she made. And that was really cool. Like I think people come to my studio and we talk about things, and then that'll change what I'm doing for years to come. And I like the idea too that sometimes I have really serious conversations when I'm making the paintings. And I think people will talk to me about something I did, some way that I painted them in a painting, and it'll also change what they do. And I'm trying to start painting some scientists and politicians and maybe different people to see what that'll bring to the table. But
Like the crazy, like
How does that change things, Heidi? Painting politicians.
oh, where's the painting of Flo? Is it not in the slideshow?
It's not on the slideshow.
Oh no.
how is it different?
Oh, I haven't
Haven't
started
done it yet.
so I'm not sure. I think,
What about healthcare workers?
yeah, I would like to paint healthcare workers as well. But I know that they're still
They're
really
like busy.
on call right now. So yeah, Lisa Niesenbaum just did a project with a lot of healthcare workers in who's a friend of mine, and also I think somebody who looks at portraiture from a somewhat similar vantage point, just did a big project for the Tate of healthcare workers. And then there's a billboard with some of them. But I think I demand a bit from my sitters too. Like I don't want to just make a beautiful painting in a certain format with them. Like I reached out to Neri Oxman, who had this really interesting design show at MoMA. She's like an architect, but she works with all kinds of people. She has like a lab at MIT and works with other scientists and designers on all kinds of different like living and non-living things. And yeah, I would like somebody to come to the painting process with some ideas we could kind of discuss during that are part of the painting. But if there are any healthcare workers listening who would like to reach out to me, or really anyone, I'm open to all kinds of different professions and ideas.
Because for the most part, you paint people you already know, no? I mean, I think, so you already have an understanding of who they are as a person, their personality. So you're looking to do sort of more people that you don't know in some ways.
Whenever I paint people I don't know, they become people I know. Like we'll sit for 4 hours after the painting and I feel like they'll end up telling me their life story, which I love. And then we'll just end up staying in touch for years. That's happened almost every time I've painted someone I didn't know. There are a couple of exceptions, but yeah, I won't just like look at a person or take a photo of them and then make a painting. I like to kind of dig a little deeper and then do something in reaction to that conversation.
On a formal level, this is really interesting because your paintings don't over rely on rendering in making your portraits. Like in many ways, they're very reduced, sort of gestural. I mean, gesture plays a big role, but they're like the function of likeness relies on like a telling gesture often, like someone's eye color or like the way they hold their head or something like this. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this idea of like gesture and reduction in your paintings. maybe as a way also to talk about how you're thinking about space, which is also kind of like deceptively simple in your paintings, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a little bit today. Like, also with teaching, I feel like I've had a really ambiguous relationship with good painting recently because it's such a big part of an established white male canon. And so I was thinking for a long time, I was looking at the painter Marie-Laurence Sen and thinking about making some paintings that were not necessarily good paintings. But then I think when I make the portraits, because so many things are about what the person brings to the table and keeping the space open, that one of the, like, an important goalpost for me is like creating light within the rectangle, and this may be good painting while keeping a really open idea of what that could be. But I think like,
Heidi, can you explain a little bit what you mean by good and bad? Like, because I don't know. Like,
yeah, I think I
like
noticed
what's bad is like the Marie lady, is she bad or?
I think her paintings relate a little bit more to like
Naive?
maybe magazine illustrations, or I don't know. I mean, I think they're amazing too. Like, there are amazing qualities in them, but I guess I studied like cubism and abstract expressionism, and when I think about like a New York school type of good painting, there's almost a light, which you can also find in Vermeer or Rembrandt. There's like a way the light travels across the painting, so it sort of also emanates out of the rectangle and really draws your eye in. And I think about that as a good painting. They also usually look really good on the wall.
I feel like there's something just like to for a minute talk about Marie-Laurence Sen, because she was one of Picasso's like friends and maybe lovers, probably lovers. But she was also a socialite, right? Or like she kind of had this sort of like element of being in connection with people, and that might be like, in some ways I think that might be a really gendered way of characterizing female painters. It's like a trope that comes up with people like Florine Stettheimer as well, right? That in order to be taken seriously as a painter of society, like you also had to be throwing parties or something like this. But it's also like she's also, despite actually sometimes being Picasso's model, is also kind of a model of a sort of social painting, which I think you also engage in. And I wonder like if that has something to do with this idea of like purported seriousness in New York school painting, and like this idea that if you're like a serious painter in the hugest quotes possible, then like the most important thing is what happens inside the rectangle, and like life exists outside of that. And I think you're proposing a really different model of thinking about the role of painting in community or in society, which is that like what happens in the rectangle is like part of a continuum that includes other parts of life and can be included in other parts of life, right? That this distinction between the rectangle and what's outside of it, the white cube and what's outside of it, like the genius artist and the rest of the world these are false binaries in a way, that maintain problematic institutions, to say the least. And I'm wondering if you could then talk again a little bit more about this idea of like creating a sense of light, especially when you often rely on the kind of the white of the canvas, right? It's almost like in some ways, like in this painting of, is that Eliza and Patricia Tribe?
Yeah.
It's almost like the light you're using the paint to like highlight the luminescence of the white of the canvas or something like this. Anyway, so I was wondering if like you could talk a little bit about light and color and how you're thinking about those things in relationship to this like question that Flo brought up about good painting or emanating light, or these like paradigms of thinking about and through painting.
Well, this particular painting, I made this in Patricia's studio, and she also makes really specific marks where the surface is super visible. Yeah, those are her paintings. And so I was thinking, but this was for a show I did called Woven Traits. And for most of the show, I made paintings of people on different fabrics that they brought to my studio. And Eliza and Patricia also had fabrics that were kind of a part of this painting that I think that they were wearing. They had come to a barbecue at my house and they were both wearing these amazing blue outfits that matched each other. And they said they often show up somewhere and their outfits match, I guess because they have a similar sense of things. So, and it was nice. I think this was the largest painting I made for that show. So I was thinking about pattern across a large space and having these kind of feminine patterns be really alive, and then also having the likeness of a person within that space. And Patricia had given me this book a few weeks before that on Marie-Laurence Sand. And I was thinking about this idea of maybe, I don't know if it's cuteness, but I saw something in Marie-Laurence Sand's paintings that I don't see in Picasso's paintings, like a depiction of women for women. And so I was thinking a lot about that and what that could look like more. Like, how do we change our aesthetics? I don't know, so that they're still really appealing, but that they, I don't know, incorporate women's viewpoint more, or not just women, because I feel like the whole idea of men and women is a really silly idea, and I think of gender as being much more fluid than that, and sexuality as being much more fluid than that.
Heidi, in that Woven Traits, that show, why can you talk a little bit about the fabric and textiles and why they are important for you?
Yeah, I mean, you really like textiles too. I think there's just something that's very pleasing about looking at different patterns on different materials. I don't know. I've always loved paintings. Like since I was a little child, I loved clothes with lots of flowers and patterns and paintings with lots of patterns in them. So I definitely, you guys brought up as a possible title for this talk, Painting for Love, and that was my title for my first show. And I try to lean into things that I love and then kind of share them with other people.
That phrase stuck out to me as another like kind of nice inversion, right? Often people will talk about their love for painting, you know, and it's sort of nice to position it the other way around, painting for love, because it reorganizes ethics as a part of an aesthetic enterprise. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about like the ideas about politics that I know you're also engaged in, and like becoming involved with the Wide Awakes this past year. Maybe, you know, like wanting to paint people who are involved in politics, like I'm sure is not disconnected from that. And how you see those parts of your life relating to one another.
Yeah, I feel like being involved in politics or just community and encouraging artists to create their own community is really important right now. I think this idea of like a lifestyle that's ethical is a little problematic. Like you have to, I think it's necessary to get into institutions and think bigger and think maybe globally, but at least have like a real community of people that you're supporting that are then going out into the wider world and doing more. I think it's everybody's responsibility. And so this semester, a 7 and I were teaching together collaboratively, and that was a great gift to be able to kind of support each other and working with the department to kind of not, I don't know about demand, but ask for certain types of change. Like we had some Cherokee artists come talk in Tennessee. We had the Sunrise Movement come speak to our class, as well as being really excited to share information about, you know, the art world in New York and the history of art that's also very near and dear to us. And then we started working or going to Wide Awakes disorientations, and the Wide Awakes is a community of creative people, and you know, anybody can join, and it's about spreading radical love and joy and supporting each other in different kinds of storytelling. And it was just really exciting to have that community of other creative people that wanted to be making art, but also engaging with the larger world and kind of like supporting that as a kind of like a wave where you go back and forth, where you could, you know, some people had really fancy jobs or titles or something, and other people maybe didn't, but it's really about like making space to hear everyone's ideas, and for those ideas to be creative ideas. Not, I feel like a lot of the time in worker environments or political environments, you'll just go in and you'll be told, okay, write 300 postcards that say this. And to me, that's not, like, doing that is not inspiring. It's really important to try to keep political work to also inspire.
Heidi, I also wanted to ask you about your upbringing, because both of your parents are musicians and artists. So how does sound influence your painting?
Yeah, my mom, Liz Phillips, makes interactive sound sculpture, and my dad, Earl Howard, is a new music composer. And he's also blind, so it's pretty interesting. He can't see my paintings, and he really took care of me a lot growing up. And so sound was really important. Like, he perceives a lot about people by hearing the tone of their voice and you know, just how they move. Like, he can hear walls, and you know, you can really think about how you know, like somebody's weight or like how strong they are by the way they move. And so I grew up like hearing and perceiving things in a different way than maybe some other people see things. And also sometimes people see my father, and because he's blind, they think that he has other disabilities, like they won't speak to him, they'll speak to somebody else who's around. Or they think like he can't cook or do or read or do, like so many things that he is great at doing. People will make the assumption that he can't do them because he's blind. So
But did he become blind, or was he born blind?
he was born blind. He was one of the smallest babies. He's in, him and his twin sister in the Guinness Book of World Records for
What?
1951.
That's great.
Yeah.
And his music is really, I listened to a little bit of the concert that he did the other day. It's really wild. It's like, I didn't know how experimental it was.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird for me to grow up hearing that kind of sound all the time. I'm at my parents' house right now, and it's really intense because my mom will be upstairs and my dad will be downstairs with that kind of sound happening all day. And most people are like, I've never heard sound like this in my life. So I think I have a pretty different relationship to sound, and I really cherish quiet as well.
It's funny because I'm gonna show images of your collaboration with your mom at the Queen's Museum, which sort of ends up emphasizing a lot of the things that we've talked about in terms of how much, both, I mean, that's the globe in front of the Queen's Museum. So this was the project, and it took up like the whole lobby of the Queen's Museum. And it was also a site for a lot of other things that happen at the Queen's Museum as you talk about it, in terms of other groups using that space. But you also did, you had a concert where your father played, and you collaborated with a dancer, and this piece was also itself collaborated and had sound elements. Your mom, like you built all these custom speakers for sound that your mom made that was taken from your garden in Sunnyside, Queens over the course of a year. Sorry, I know this project pretty well, not to put words in your mouth, but I mean, it seems like it, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about sound, the relationship between sound and image maybe in this piece, and also, it's like it's another way of opening up painting, right? It's another way of making painting really porous, like expanding its space, expanding how much space it takes up in the mind, in the ears, and yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I always I love having somebody talk to me while I'm painting them, and the effect the conversation has on marks. And I think you showed that painting I made of the cellist Ernst Reisiger, who's a really amazing cellist who I knew through my parents, who came and played the cello in my studio when I was making that work. And I studied dance until I was 13 very seriously, and my mom worked with Merce Cunningham and always took me to his performances when I was a child, and I loved like seeing that. And I think I thought a lot about choreography before I thought about painting. Like we would listen to music in the car, and I would imagine different dances that I wanted to make happen. And so when I think about when I make marks, it's really in reaction to sound. So while I was making this painting at the Queen's Museum, because we couldn't install the speakers before I started making the painting, my mom was sitting kind of at the top of those stairs that you can see on the right-hand side, and she was mixing the sounds. And I had my friend Mark Singbush driving the lift, and I would make marks across the whole space in reaction to these sounds. And there's a whole section in the fall that was dripping paint, but I'd love to do this again with even like broader marks in reaction to the sound.
Heidi, I also wanted to ask, was this the first time you started making ceramics and including them in the paintings? 'Cause
Yeah.
they're all sconces where the sound comes out of, that's yours. So and now you've been making a lot of ceramics, right?
Yeah, so I started making ceramics at Columbia. My friend Laura Miller started a clay club. And so I just really wanted to make cups. It was like on Sundays and we just hang out and make cups. But then I started to make a few other things. And then when we got to the Rijksacademy, which was this residency that Esteban did in the Netherlands, that's a 2-year residency, our house was really like gray. Everything there was really gray. And so we started making these pots so we could have like plants growing all over our house because they had a ceramics facility there. And that's kind of how I really started making a lot of ceramics. And my mom wanted me to make speakers that were flowers. She has some incredible like pots that she'll use as speakers, but they function really well because they're made on the wheel. And so I brought a lot of those ceramics back from Amsterdam for the show, and they didn't like carry the sound well because it was hard to test the sound from there. But yeah, I really like sculpture. I took a sculpture class at Yale actually when I was 16. I did like a summer program there, and that's where I got into Edith Wharton too. I took an English class and a sculpture class, and then I tried to drop out of Bronx Science because it was too test-based, and I love my classes at Yale and how we got to actually like read whole books and then talk about them in relation to art. And I was like high school, so I tried to leave my last year of high school, but I couldn't. But in that class I was interested in making pretty figurative sculptures. I guess I even though my parents do really wild installation new music work, when I start making things, I always like with painting, I wanted to make very illusionistic paintings. And I think with sculpture as well, I was pretty interested in just sculpting the figure. And then I've come back to that a little bit because Flo, you sent me these amazing, I was going to make you a cup and then you said, can you make me this vessel? And it was like this frog-like figure holding a bowl. It was really great. And then I started to make all these sculptures of women with these sort of bowls.
Yeah, I'm excited to see them.
Yeah.
Because how much, is it, you work pretty fast, right? Like when you make them, you can make a bunch.
Yeah. They're small. That figure you sent me was huge though, right?
Yeah. And I guess like maybe we could talk about the podcast and then open it up for questions. So you started a podcast called Life is Collaborative with Esto, and you interview artists that collaborate on projects. What has that process been like of having these conversations, editing, learning curve?
Yeah, well, we interview, it's actually supposed to be artists that don't officially collaborate on projects, but we thought that we've interviewed Precog for the podcast because we're not, I feel like everything is so formal now in the art world. I think a lot of it was inspired by moving to the Netherlands for Esther's residency at the Rijksacademy, and we realized how much like freedom to create a community is important, and how much like we just kind of stepped into the painting world in New York, and there's so many amazing people making paintings here. Like I remember one time when I was back here, I ran into my friend on the subway and we talked for 15 minutes about different types of green paint. And also like how important our relationship was. And sometimes these international residencies and prestigious programs, they act as if you can make art anywhere. And I actually think that making the choice to be in a certain place with a certain group of people is really important. So it's kind of about that, like how over time, it's also for students so they can think about like how to make community and how those conversations happen. And it seemed really relevant during the pandemic because there's we're missing a lot of those chance conversations that happen with your community about like little technical things or painting jokes. Like we did one episode with Mark Thomas Gibson and Katie Gegenheimer, and I think it was just so much fun because we just talked about, I don't know, different paintings we like basically. But it was just nice to have that conversation. So that's kind of what the podcast is about. And I also am pretty uncomfortable with my voice. And I feel like as a young woman, I made my voice smaller and smaller, but that's not the way I want it to be at all. So this is a space where I have to keep hearing my own voice and re-examining it and deciding what I want it to be, I guess.
So if anybody has questions for Heidi, please drop them in the chat and I'll ask them. But in the meantime, I was going to ask you what it's been like to make digital portraits. As an aside, I think one of the first things I ever read that you wrote was this like treatise on the internet from when you were in grad school. It was like the internet and art. So I know you've been thinking about the internet and the way that it like provides this kind of like horizontal space for connecting different kinds of information for a long time. And I think in some ways that's the space of your paintings, you know, like your paintings have this way of making like a kind of a space where everything can be related to itself and other things. It's not a vertical space in that sense. And I'm wondering like how actually painting from digital images and like Zoom conversations and screens, like whether that's affecting your work or how you're thinking about that.
Well, I was making these paintings when I was in grad school. So I was thinking about the interface of Instagram and Facebook, and I would always stalk a lot of people online. I guess I do that a little bit now, but when I was younger, I was really like, I would, you know, really focus on certain people like through this platform of the internet. And it was when those platforms first came out. But images were so much more precious then. Like now there's just this endless scroll of images that you get from people all the time, everywhere. And so I was making these paintings in grad school about those platforms, and a lot of my professors were like, oh, I don't look at Instagram or Facebook, like that's not relevant. And so I always have my students read this essay by my friend Roz Cruz, who's coming up on Life is Collaborative next with her partner Spencer Byrne. That's kind of about distrusting institutions and having to make your own decisions. And I'm reading also this book about the attention economy. I'm gonna forget the title, but it's really great. So wait, let me see if I can. Oh, it's Jenny Odell. Anyway, yeah, I don't have like one short answer to that. I just think about it a lot.
What has it been like to paint people through like FaceTime photos though? Like how is that something that, I mean, I guess it like reinforces other kinds of rectangles, you know? But
yeah. I think the photos for the podcast, a lot of things in my art, I'm like, I'm just gonna do it and then we can analyze it like a couple years later or something. I think that's a good way. I mean, I think it's good to be aware of all the frameworks, and then I'll be like reading things about the frameworks, but then I'll just set up the situation in my studio and just make the thing, and then I feel like we'll look back on it and hopefully it'll shed some light that might not have been there without the painting getting made.
Yeah, I was wondering about sound because you were saying that you are normally talking to a person while you're making these paintings, or like, your mom was making sounds and those were like you were doing brushstroke gestures based on that. But if you're working from like a still image, like what sounds are you listening to while you're making the painting?
So I just started these with the podcast, but for the one of you guys, I just listened to the podcast. I like edited the podcast.
Oh, I see. So you're listening to us talk while you're
But then I think I had some other audio going on too afterward, because when I was editing, I actually had to focus on editing. But I had just kind of like put that audio into my brain. But I think, yeah, that like maybe it's a little bit of a different. So I've been making Zoom portraits where I actually do talk to the person the whole time I'm making the painting on Zoom. And then these kind of illustration paintings for the podcast are different. But I'm not sure what's going on with them yet.
Drea wants to know who you fantasize about doing who you fantasize doing a portrait of. Like, what is your fantasy portrait session?
Well, I'd really like to paint Mary Oxman and maybe Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I don't know. It's really important to me that the person wants to be there for the portrait too. Like that's one of the. I would like to paint Donna Haraway also. Yeah, but it's also like, I mean, before the pandemic, I liked being able to kind of meet the person and feel them out and then be like, hey, would you be interested in doing this? But now that seems like it's not gonna, like, things aren't gonna be like that where I can just run into them. So yeah, I have to do some more cold calling, I guess.
Sean has a question, which is, it seems like the initial sitting and conversation that it creates is really relevant to your process. Is a lot happening to the paintings afterwards, or are they made in one go?
I try to make them in one sitting. With the Zoom portraits, I've most of the time been touching them up just because I feel like time spent on Zoom is so exhausting. Like if someone's in the studio for 6 hours and then we're having dinner after, that can be pretty great. But being on Zoom for 6 hours, I feel like not as ideal for anyone. Even though it's nice, someone can be like, oh, I'm gonna go make lunch and then I'll come back, but it's still, there's something kind of exhausting about it. But I've been thinking of making some, one of my friends just offered me some really large canvases. So I might make some longer, big paintings that will maybe not be all in one sitting. And I like at the Rauschenberg residency, I was having people send me images that inspired their sense of themselves. And I was really into that project too. It kind of lagged during the pandemic because I didn't have access to a studio, but I have access again. But there's this one painting I did of Martha Tuttle, and she sent me this image from that Agnes Varda movie. I think it's called Vagabond. And then there's an image of Pat Steer and of her mom. And I used the sand from the beach outside the studio. And I love like looking, now that painting's hanging up in my parents' house, and I love, it just had like a different spirit. It was fun to collage all those images that somebody gave to me. So I might keep working with that kind of idea.
Images? What, like they were sending you images that
Influence their sense of themselves.
that's amazing. That's like such an aspirational, that feels like such an aspirational like project, you know? Like in the sense that are the ways that we see ourselves, or the like things that have contributed to senses of ourselves are so like immaterial in so many ways.
Yeah, there's also this amazing, in the things that Martha sent me, there's this amazing clay sculpture that has like, it's like an open body that has these like organs in it. So yeah, I have to look back on there were some of those that didn't get, I don't know why I've been moving studios a lot, and that's been strange, and I'm hoping that my next studio I get to stay in for a long time.
Welcome back to New York, Heidi.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, that seems like a good place to stop our like the formal programming part of the night, unless Flo or Kelly have any other questions. No? Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Heidi. We're gonna stop recording, but everyone, please, if you want to hang out and say hi, and we love you all and Happy New Year.